Today we're going to be talking about the energy crisis of the 70s, as well as globalization and in the 21st century, and how all of that had to do with conservative politics in the Reagan era. So let's begin with the energy crisis of the 70s. A lot of this had to do with globalization. And when I say that, I mean the United States policy towards a foreign government, in this case specifically Israel. There were Arab governments, and the state of Israel had been at war for quite some time now. And basically, Saudi Arabia, which was our one of our largest and probably our predominant supplier of oil, was basically said, if any country helps or aids Israel, we will not export to them. We'll cut off our oil exports. The United States, we did so anyway. And it played a major role in how we looked at energy, namely because we had a massive shortage. There were people weren't there were brownouts. People weren't able to get gas with rations in effect. Let's see how Nixon reacts to all of this. He says that he sort of tries to undermine the crisis by saying well, I would say that simply it's in the short term we face a problem. So you kind of see him distancing himself. But his solution is looking for new energy sources. And that's something that, whether it's the pipeline in Alaska or it's various other sources, particularly when it comes to coal. So he'd just looking at a variety of non-renewable, mind you, resources, and saying that, okay, we need to invest in these. Now, for environmentalists, this would be bad enough because, these resources aren't going to be there forever. However, he also advocated for the relaxation of emission standards. So not only were we going for resources that wouldn't last, the standards that we already had in place for health and safety were gutted, for lack of a better word. And environmentalists saw this as a major problem with because things like this happened. One of the results of deregulation was the massive increase in waste. And it was just a mess. There were sewage was being dumped into water streams, etc., etc. It wasn't a happy time. So let's see what after Nixon left office, Carter's response was that we need to avoid having nuclear plants, strip mining, burning coal, and offshore wells, because these are all problematic energy resources. He saw very long-term consequences for them, which was pretty foreseeable by those who had the foresight. So his solution was this: conservation, which the definition of that would be to curtail the use of the wasteful use of resources. So We would stop using energy as wastefully as we have, and that would solve the problem that we're facing. Methods include insulation, saving heating in the house, as well as more fuel efficient cars, etc., etc. Emissions controls on factories, businesses, industries. Now let's see what Reagan had to say about this. Ronald Reagan was very, very opposed to this kind of response. He said it's no program to simply say use less energy. And given the waste that many Americans were making, it was, we were rather inefficient at using resources. Given that, it's easy to say that conservation could have been a staple, but Reagan did not see it that way. He said it's not a strategy. We need to find more, and that was in his announcement for candidacy, and with the slogan that nobody's probably heard before, "Make America Great Again." So we see the aftermath in the modern era. We see the problem that here is that you see a decrease in petroleum around the same time as the crisis. Same thing for natural gas. You see coal steadily increasing, and all of these resources, they're non-renewable energy. They will run out, and when they do, we've set ourselves up for a lot of trouble. And renewable energies are really negligent. This is hydroelectric right here, and it's comparable to burning wood in terms of how much we use it. Now let's talk about globalization and terror. But to do that, we have to go to the Reagan era, where we were fighting the Soviet Union and its sphere of influence, predominantly in Afghanistan and other places. So what Reagan did was he got fundamentalists. He actually, through the CIA, he advocated for the training of what he called freedom fighters, who were actually extremists. So the alarming, here you see the alarming transition of rhetoric, because globalization for Reagan wasn't just expanding international markets. It was capitalist, but it was particularly anti-communist. So that's why you see words like freedom, liberty, buzzwords being thrown around in his speeches to advocate for American values and their propagation against the Soviet Union. So here he calls, among others, Islamic extremists in Afghanistan. He refers to them as freedom fighters. You'll see this rhetoric and how it was used to support these efforts. Why is this still relevant today? Because when we look at freedom fighters, or quote-unquote freedom fighters, the Mujahideen and are basically the foundation of the modern Taliban, as was seen in our primary document readings. And along with the Taliban came a man known as Osama bin Laden. He was created a network called Al-Qaeda, which was responsible for the terrorist attacks of September 11th. And according to the 9/11 Commission report, he tapped on Al-Qaeda and extremist groups. They tap on nostalgia for Islam's past glory by appealing to a Sunni and Arab group. This was seen with the majority of the attackers. They were they came from Arab countries. So this was his target demographic. This was who he was trying to reach. And the fact of the matter being that this was a very minuscule minority, but it was Al Qaeda was very hard and is very hard to combat today because it's decentralized. So we're finding some difficulty there. We have it's kind of like our past is coming to bite us back in the butt, if pardon my language there. But that's these problems. They've created a system of, particularly when you look at environmentalism, it's setting us up for decline. When we do run out of petroleum, when we do run out of natural gas, of these resources, we do not have the infrastructure in renewables to set ourselves up. So I do believe it is setting us up for decline. Now, as to the war on terror, I do believe that that's more complex, because after the removal of, or the dissolution of the Soviet Union, we became the number one superpower of the world. But now we're facing a threat that's extremely decentralized. So I would say that the environmentalism certainly has set us up for decline, whereas the globalization itself has not. Thank you for your time.